Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Screamer, Kingmaker, out January 13th on Steam Hammer. This album has 10 tracks, 39 minutes in length, and this is the band's 5th full-length studio album. They are a Swedish heavy metal band. From a design point of view, this album is simple. It doesn't try to overcomplicate. It doesn't try to create something that it doesn't need to. It just wants to give you the songs, give them in a nice fluidity kind of way, putting them together with a sense of continuity so that you can enjoy the record from start to finish without ever really feeling like the album pauses or breaks. There are ebbs and flows from track to track. It's not a linear record. It's not a record that stays balanced throughout. Definitely giving you different perspectives, different options, different styles and different emotions, and all of this is important in a way that still stays somewhat connected and it doesn't create a lot of volatility throughout the entire album. So the design of this record matches the sound and the experience that they created, and when you have those two working as one, you're always going to have an album that has incredible playability. As far as the sound is concerned, I feel like this album brought 3 different genres to the table: pure rock and roll, glam rock, and new wave of British heavy metal, that classic heavy metal sound. Now this mixture of genres works well because they took 2 almost every single time and they allowed 2 of them to blend in and create almost a new experience. Some songs bring all 3, but there's always 2 that become the more predominant ones that really drive where these songs are going, give you a little bit of a starting point, and definitely defining what the finish line is going to be. Another element that defines the sound of this record is definitely the production behind it. The production on this album takes the record a little bit into the past. It gives you this sensation of listening to a very old school classic heavy metal album that has then other influences. Now the other influences take a little bit away of that sting, that old school sting, because they offer a little bit better definition in terms of what the sound is and what the sound gives. The more rock-driven tracks, or the tracks that have some glam rock influences in them, they always feel crisper. They feel lighter. They don't feel as heavy, and I don't mean heavy from a sound point of view, but heavy in terms of the weight that it's putting onto the tracks. The more classic heavy metal songs on this record definitely have a different approach. They definitely sound a little bit thicker in the overall production behind it. And that thickness of production is very reminiscent of old school heavy metal albums. So it's a record that allows you to feel like it has perhaps a toe in the present, but it has at least the rest of the foot in the past. And I think this album could have been a little bit more connected with the future, not necessarily the present, not necessarily the past. And that takes a little bit away from how this album is going to be perceived going forward. I enjoy the record, I enjoy the sound, but I thought that the production behind it could have moved the needle in a different direction and give this album more energy. Allow the guitars, for example, to be a little bit brighter, because this is a very guitar-driven record from start to finish. It doesn't matter if the song has a classic heavy metal sound to it. It doesn't matter if the song is more pure rock and roll. Regardless of where they're going, the guitars are always the ones leading the way. They're always the motor behind every single song. And I felt that if the solos, for example, had a little bit of less weight on them, if they were better defined, if they were more crisp, that would increase the overall presence of the track. That would increase the overall volume of the track without making it feel so thick, so compound. And the same could be said for the riffs, the same could be said for the melodies. Now, all of this takes a little bit away in terms of what the experience going into the future is going to be, but it doesn't really take anything from the experience of this moment, because when you create an album that has a lot of classic heavy metal sound to it, going with a production like that, perhaps at first glance it makes sense, and it works in some songs. It just gets a little bit cumbersome as you progress down the line. Now the bass on this album, I felt like it was a little bit too much of it. It popped a little bit too much at times. I would have liked to see the bass a little bit better blended with the overall experience. I think it would make the sound feel a little bit less abrupt at times. It would allow the sound to feel also a little bit more modern. Even the bass popping in the forefront in certain tracks also adds to that old school effect that the overall record has. And when you start adding that to the overall mix, it starts to put too many elements that once again makes you look to the past and not necessarily look to the future. The keys on this record were really interesting and I really enjoyed it. I felt like it added, while adding some elements of the past, while bringing some glam rock elements into this record, they didn't define the record. They were sporadic, they were well used, they were used more as a layer, as a backdrop for melody, and they didn't interfere with the overall experience that you're going to get out of these songs. And depending on where you're listening to this album, you may notice it or you may not. And that adds to the overall flavor of these tracks, because you may listen to a song multiple times and then you change platforms and the song is going to feel refreshed, rejuvenated. It's going to have a different experience. And that is something interesting, something that adds value to the overall record. Now, the vocal performance is outstanding. I really enjoyed it. It matched the dynamic of the album. It matched the song construction, and it definitely matched the soundscape that they created, bringing that old school flavor, that classic approach in terms of the vocal range, the delivery, the tonality, and it works well with the songs, and it works well within this record. Definitely one of the highlights of the album. Overall, this is a strong record. Very enjoyable record to listen to, but I honestly feel like this album could have a bigger pop if it defined itself more as a record that pushes the band forward and not necessarily as connected with the past, not just with the past of the band, but with the past of the genres that define the overall sound experience. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Chasing the Rainbow. The keys opening up this track really define the song, or at least help define the song, a song that has a very classic heavy metal sound to it. From the guitars to the vocals to the overall composition, it's a classic track in all of its glory. The verses are way more driven. The verses really push you forward, and then when you get to the chorus, there's an infusion of melody that allows that chorus to be a little bit more layered, to be a little bit more texture, but also to be a little bit more catchy and a little bit more hooky. The solo section adds energy to the track. It ignites the energy that the track has, perhaps more in the verses than in the chorus, but it completes the song. And then having the keys behind that solo or layered into the solo, it's even better, because there's a sense of continuity here. You're not just using them at the beginning, you're going to use them sporadically throughout the track. You're infusing them in a very important momentum of the song, and then you are going to allow the track to finish off almost as a conglomerate of all the different elements that you have experienced, including the keys. So I really enjoyed this track. It had a little bit of a Dio vibe to it, not just because it's called Chasing the Rainbow, just the way it's constructed, the way it sounds, the way it comes across. Great song all around. Next, Burn It Down. Very Motorhead track. I mean, this song specifically in the verses, it changes when it gets to the chorus. The chorus is a completely different song, feels like a completely different song, but the verses of this track is pure rock and roll. Is that edgy garage, like small venue style rock and roll, very gritty, with the guitars pushing you forward, slapping you in the face. That Motorhead sound that it's so traditional to that band, but so many other bands bring it into the forefront and do it really well, and these guys are a perfect example of that. This track just has all of those elements alive and well in its sound, coming from the guitars first and foremost. Incredible riffage all around. Now, the track flows really well, and then when you get into the chorus, it feels like it brings in different influences. The song changes the dynamic, it slows down, becomes more melodic, the keys come in, that infuses a little bit of brightness to the track. It's no longer a garage rock track, it's no longer a small club rock track, it becomes a little bit more of an arena rock style song when it gets into that chorus. A completely break from how the verses felt in terms of what they gave you, what they offer you. Interesting track because it doesn't feel broken. Even though these two portions of the song are very different from one another, how they flow from one into the other is very well done and allows for a sense of continuity, a sense of sequence. You're just walking down a hallway and you're opening different doors. That's kind of how the track is built in, and that works well, making everything memorable about this track, because the vocals in the chorus, with the layers, with the texture, adding a little bit of an anthem vibe to this song, and that adds to that arena rock and roll experience that I was talking about. Last but not least, Sounds of the Night, another guitar-driven song. I mean, I could say that almost about every single track on this album. The keys layered behind the guitar sound are very helpful in creating almost a nuance in terms of what the melody is, almost forgotten in the experience that you're having when you're listening to it, because you're focusing more on the guitar sound, less on what the keys are doing, but they're always there, and that creates a nice dynamic between the two. It makes the sound feel like it has more volume, it makes the sound feel a little bit more robust, having a little bit more substance, and that is important in order to create dynamic movements within the song, from verses to chorus, from chorus to verses. The vocals felt different on this track. A little bit warmer, a little bit more subdued, a little bit calmer, and that changed the tonality and changed the overall delivery. It felt like they came down, they're closer to the track, they're not as far away from the track as some of the other songs are. So this track brings music, sound, experience, and vocals together almost as one, really squeezing them in, making the song more balanced, more cohesive from start to finish. Great track all around. This is it, Screamer with Kingmaker, out January 13th on Steam Hammer. Let me know your thoughts on the band. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.